My name is Steve Seuss. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Massachusetts Board of Real Estate Appraisers, otherwise known as MBREA. We're a trade association that's been around since 1934, and we serve real estate appraisers in Massachusetts and in the other New England states. Among other things, we're also a sponsoring organization of the Appraisal Foundation. Today, we're going to be covering ANSI, a new standard for measuring. And a program will cover, topics will include at least five items and possibly more. What is GLA versus finished square footage, getting height measurements, or ceiling height requirements, below grade determinations, room counts, which property types are affected. There's a lot of change that has gone into the way measurements are done, and so we'll be dealing with all of that. We'd ask you today, if you've got questions, to use the chat feature. We'll be monitoring it, and we'll try to get to as many of the questions as we possibly can. If we don't get to them all, we'll see if we can get them in writing from Sabrina, and if we can, then we'll possibly be able to do a little bit more of a written answers to some of the questions. So without further delay in starting the program, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Anthony Federico. Tony is a certified residential appraiser based in Haverhill. He's got 30+ years appraising all types of residential property for attorneys, estate planners, private clients, and lenders. In addition to his Mass and New Hampshire appraiser certification, Tony is also a Massachusetts licensed construction supervisor. He's an AQB certified USPAP instructor and a professional ethics review appraiser. He holds the RA designation from the MBREA and is on the FHA roster of approved appraisers. He served on MBREA's Board of Trustees and is an active education developer and instructor for the association. Aside from solving real estate value problems in his free time, Tony loves old world gardening, cooking, a large assortment of other interests, and more importantly, spending time with his family and grandchildren. So Tony, at this point, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Steve, and thank everybody for participating in this webinar. We all know that a lot of changes are occurring with mortgage lending and the secondary market guidelines and regulations. The biggest announcement that came recently that affects pretty much all of us, whether we are real estate agents or real estate appraisers who value particularly residential properties, was prior to April 1st, which was the implementation date. Fannie Mae made an announcement that it was going to start requiring appraisers to adhere to the ANSI Z765 standard for measuring, calculating, and reporting square footage above grade and below grade. The ANSI standard was developed by the American National Standards Institute, which is a well-known and well-respected organization that sets standards, and it also has global reach. Originally, the standard was released in 2003 when I first became aware of it and started applying it. And it has slowly evolved because it does need to respond to some changes as they occur in the marketplace. I will say that the standards are not very quick to change. So once you begin to adjust to this as a real estate broker or real estate sales agent, you will begin to realize that this actually is an important adoption by Fannie Mae because it is standardized, meaning that all appraisers and hopefully most real estate agents by adoption will actually be able to calculate the above grade and below grade finished and unfinished areas of single family properties, whether they're attached or detached. And as I get into the program today, I'll begin to specifically show you photo exhibits of various types of properties on the interiors. And I'll be explaining a little bit from real world experience as to how all of this really will apply. Change is never easy. I realize that. We certainly have had our share of a lot of changes in a very short period of time. We've all endured a very robust housing market and all the things that occur with that. And it's been pretty difficult to just keep pace and still be on point when it comes to, let's say, somebody looking around after the fact and asking a question. Why did you list the property as being this size? Why is your appraisal total for gross living area different than the assessor property field card? Why is it different than the MLS disclosure? So on and on the story goes, but I'll be getting into it to try to bring some sense and sensibility to this and show you how we're all going to really benefit. Fannie Mae has been on a very aggressive path to standardization for a relatively long period of time, but much more aggressively in recent years. I will say that of the government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, only Fannie Mae has adopted the ANSI Z765 standard at this time. Freddie Mac is very likely to adopt it, but at this point, again, it's only Fannie Mae. There's also the possibility that FHA may soon adopt it as well. It's just a matter of waiting it out to see how successful Fannie Mae is with this particular direction that they're going in. It's about big data. And the more big data there is, the more confusing it can become, and the need for standardization so that certain data indicators can be replicated by others as well, following the same standards. And that's what actually has initiated this. I want to bring up one important point. The term GLA stands for gross living area. It is a term specific to Fannie Mae, to Freddie Mac, to FHA, to VA, and to USDA. It is not a term used in ANSI. ANSI says square footage, finished or unfinished, attached or detached. So when I am using the term in reference to Fannie Mae today about GLA, which is their term, I am specifically talking about in ANSI, finished above grade, wholly above grade. And I'll explain some of the distinctions there with some of the various housing types that we run into in the residential housing sector. The square footage calculation with Fannie Mae, as I said, it'll pertain to single family housing. It does not pertain to 2 to 4 unit small residential income properties. It does pertain to attached or detached architectural designs, including townhouse design, row house design, side-by-side houses design, and that is irrespective of the ownership type, such as condo or co-op. So as not to be confused, I'm going to clear this up right now. The fact that something is owned in condominium form of ownership has nothing to do with ANSI or Fannie Mae in their adoption of this standard. Condominium, again, is a form of ownership. It is not an architectural style of housing. There are, on the issue of condominium, there are many condominium owned properties that are semi-detached. They have a party wall and they may be what's called an end unit. There might be 3 or 4 of them. They look almost like row houses. They could simply be what I refer to in my area as a condex, meaning they're 2 units of one building, left side or right side, party wall. The land itself is commonly owned by the 2. And each one holds a 50% undivided interest. You put the 2 together, you get 100% of the land. So again, keep in mind, if a type of condominium ownership arises and you're involved, it is going to be measured according to this ANSI standard. with the exception of a condominium unit in a multi-unit building, such as a low-rise, mid-rise, high-rise, that is of garden design. Okay, in that case, you will continue to report, as you always have, the interior room measurements. Sometimes I know you do what I do, you get it from the plan of record that was recorded with the very first unit deed, and it usually has all of the measurements in their calculation. I will warn you, though, that sometimes that calculation as it's being reported does include the garage space, which is not living area, and it may even include a storage space, which is not living area. So right away, if you use their number, there could be a difference between how the appraiser reports gross living area for that particular unit. So let's talk about what's really different in terms of what you've always been doing, or what you learned on your own, or what you were trained to do. In this case here, measurements and calculations for the standard and for Fannie Mae forever has always been the exterior measurement of the building. It is not the interior room sizes. So when I see these floor plans being uploaded, more recently in MLS, I'm looking at them and I'm saying, that's nice. When I was a realtor, once upon a time, 32 years ago, I used to love seeing that because I could tell a potential buyer, oh, there's no problem. You can fit your furniture in this room. There's enough space for you to have a convertible type of a layout, however it suits you. But when it comes to residential lending and Fannie Mae buying mortgages on the secondary market, it has nothing to do with interior measurements. It is the exterior dimension of the building. And then it will include the upper levels, and I'll get into that. On the upper levels, you can look at the interior measurements, because when I go into a house design such as a Cape, I don't bring a ladder with me to go up on the outside and hoist up a 40-foot ladder. I'll measure the interior as I view it upstairs when I get there, but I am going to be adding in the thickness of the wall to the finished exterior surface of that structure. Typically, I'm going to share this with you. It's somewhere between 6 inches and 9 inches that would get added to the exterior wall on each end. If I'm in a Cape, let's say, I have a gable end here and a gable end here, I would effectively be adding 1 foot to my interior measurement. It will depend on the material that finishes the exterior, though, because clapboard and vinyl siding would be different, let's say, than shake, shingle, or masonry exterior. They may be a little thicker. So that's a determination the appraiser will make. And hopefully you would also take into consideration. Here's an example of a typical hip roof center entrance colonial with a 1-story side addition. Many of you have seen these. You will notice that this is masonry facade or veneer in the front, and this is either clapboard or vinyl on the other walls. I realized from my construction understanding that this facing wall is going to be thicker, probably, than this wall to the finish. I also see here, as you do, that there is a protrusion. It's a chimney. When we measure these as appraisers following the ANSI standard, we're measuring corner to corner, not including this particular type of protrusion. There are some that we will include. And we're going to go right straight through that wall, across the wall, to get that measured. So let's just say, for example, this is a 26 measure, and this is a 36 measure. The exterior dimension on the first floor says 26 by 36 on my building sketch to the lender. When I get to the upper level, it's going to probably be identical because you don't see any other kinds of add-ons. But this is brought up to you today to let you know that we are not making this complicated by measuring this distance, coming out for the thickness of the chimney, going across the chimney, back in and back out. It's a straight shot of measure. If that's in my way, then I can go on this side and I'll measure to this point. I'll measure across that side addition, and then I'll pick up where I left off and bring it all together. In most cases, it's very simple measure when you get into this type of housing. You don't see dormers and other kinds of things to complicate it. So right away, you see, this is not complicated to measure on the exterior. There are three circumstances on the upper level, though, that need to come into play, which you are not familiar with and you will need to become familiar with to properly service your listing in your fiduciary capacity. The first thing is, on the upper levels, ceiling heights must be minimum of 7 feet high vertically from the finished floor to the finished ceiling. And it's got to be over 50% or more of the area that's being calculated. In order for that to be considered, in this case, I'm going to use an example of above grade square footage, AKA GLA to Fannie Mae. So I can say on the second level of this house, yes, I measured from the finished floor vertically with my little laser beam, and it was more than 7 feet. So that upper story will be calculating in, and there are no slopes, as totally GLA. So let's just say the first floor was 1,200 square feet. The second floor is 1,200 square feet. It is a 2,400 square foot GLA. That does not include and never will include anything in this finished basement that may be there. That is totally separate from what we call GLA, or above grade square footage. You're in the habit, some of you, of just lumping that finished square footage in that you pull out of that public data in the that you have access to, and you're throwing that in your listing. Unfortunately, we scrutinize that data as appraisers, and we have to verify it. And when I see where you're getting it from, and I realize it, I also look at the property record card or the field card. I see a building sketch and I calculate it out from their sketch. And I say the MLS is including the finished basement rooms, or it's including above grade low slope areas that are really finished attic and not second story. So unfortunately, until we all get on the same page, there's going to be that period of confusion. And the beauty of this ANSI standard is it will bring together groups that use different terminologies that may have different meanings to get on a common ground where we can communicate together meaningfully and reliably to be able to produce something that's more accurate than what's been going on. There has never been a standard for residential housing until the ANSI standard came out in 2003. Shockingly, for commercial properties, those that are familiar with them, there has been a standard for over 80 years in this country as to how to measure commercial properties. So it is about time we got on board as residential practitioners, whether you're brokers representing again as a fiduciary, or whether it's me as an independent appraiser conducting an appraisal assignment for, attorney casework that's being litigated, or mortgage financing that's going to be purchased on the secondary market, or whatever other types of assignments that I take on as an independent appraiser. I can identify that I am following the ANSI Z765 standard that was adopted in 2021 to arrive at my calculation of that habitable living area fully above grade, knowing that it's got 7 feet minimum vertical ceiling heights and it meets the standard. The 5 foot is where it gets a little bit complicated for all of us who are not familiar with it. That is the minimum. When you're in an area, and I'm going to show you a photo right now, you're in an area that has a slope and it is a room that is finished. The first thing you would do, and I do, is I measure from the finished floor up. Do I have 7 feet in this room? In this illustration, I did. However, I can begin only at the 5-foot point on the slope. Most of us realize that when you have finished slopes, they often go all the way down, some cases to 3 feet. More commonly, it's 4 feet, but I cannot calculate that as living area until I meet the standard minimum of 5 feet. So the actual measure of this room is going to be everything from this point, if you're looking at this floor, all the way over to here. And then we know that's 7 feet. That's where I begin to calculate the size. This area here, Fannie Mae has identified it in their recent releases as the appraiser is to treat that as non-GLA area. And I'll give you some scenarios in a short while. It does not mean that by reducing the living area size that's reported to the lender, that the value is going to necessarily suffer. It all depends on how the market views this. It's very possible, and I frequently do it in the many areas where I appraise in suburban North Shore, suburban North, Merrimack Valley, and over the border into southern Rockingham County in New Hampshire, which is now pretty much Massachusetts. And I'm following the same standard. In most cases, this is going to add up to some square footage, which you'll see as we go forward. It will appear in the appraisal report. Fannie Mae allows us to include it as long as the market evidence proves that there is a basis for adjustment. And I'll explain that to you a little bit. The other thing is we're going to be talking about openings and floors below. I think it's pretty plain to say, if you're looking out over from the second floor into a 2-story foyer from down below, there's nothing to walk on. That is cubic airspace. That is not living area. So when you are measuring from the outside of a building and you're going across the wall on the first floor, yes, that's all walkable living area. But when I go upstairs and I see this is a 2-story foyer, and I'll show you some, I'm going to be backing that out on the second level. And I'll show you where and why. So remember, these are some special circumstances. Ceiling heights must be no less than 5 feet on the sloped finished areas, even if it's got beautiful hardwood flooring, all the way to 3 feet. It must be 7 feet, not 6 feet, 8 inches, 7 feet, which is 84 inches. 6 feet, 8 inches is 80 inches. You're 4 inches short. Therefore, that is likely to be a finished attic, which is the flip-flop of a finished basement. And its contributory value may be equal to, greater than, or less than. It depends on the research in the market evidence that the appraiser derives. So let's go into some of these. I'm sure many of you have taken a listing on a property, or as a buyer agent, you've gone into homes and they said, yeah, this is a 4-bedroom house. And you go into this 4-bedroom house and you run into 2 of the 4 bedrooms of these. And you get a reaction from the potential buyer. Oh, those bedrooms are much smaller than I thought. I'm sure you've heard that before. Gee, too bad they didn't just open up the wall and make it 3 big bedrooms instead of squeezing that little other bedroom in. Here's a classic example of a finished attic. Beautiful. It's the same quality of finishes down below. However, I have an issue with meeting the standard for ceiling height. As you can see, there is a heating source, and there are these little cubby areas, which are actually eaves, but to save on the floor space to be able to utilize more of the room, somebody very smartly created these little tuckaways. Unfortunately, the chimney runs right up through. The point here is that when you walk up into this space, if you're taking a listing or if you're viewing it with potential buyers, your laser beam, if that's what you're using, is going to begin at the 5-foot mark in terms of what's going to really calculate as above grade finished area. The minute you don't have 7 feet, don't waste your time. It's not going to count. It will count as finished attic, and it may be equal to, as I said, down below, but you should not be reporting that as part of the gross living area. That is non-living area as far as the gross calculation goes. Here's an example. This house was a rehab for resale. They bought it, they gutted it out, it desperately needed to be. All new drywall, new ceiling work, less expensive to throw carpeting in, baseboard heating units. They're calling this a bedroom, and on the other side of the wall, they're calling that a bedroom. Very small rooms, I might add, because I've got to have 7 feet, and then I can only start at the 5-foot mark. So I've actually got a 6-foot bedroom, 6 feet by whatever that distance is. In this case here, it was 11 feet. So you got a bedroom 6 feet by 11, which is 66 square feet. If you're dealing with square footage, because you know size is the language of real estate. How big is the house? How big are the rooms? Most people don't really talk in square feet, but sometimes they do when they're trying to measure out furniture placement. As you can see here, this bedroom appears to be a little larger. So again, don't treat this as first floor, second floor, third floor. It's first floor, second floor, and finished attic space. Just giving you these as what I run into. Whether I run into them as the appraiser now for 32 years, or prior to that as a real estate agent, when we didn't really have the standard. It was pretty much local custom. Well, how does the market consider it? This one here, you know, as I'm walking through this as an appraiser, I am paying attention to what you pay attention to, which is flow and function. The flow of the floor plan can either enhance or it can take away from the market appeal to buyers. They may say, I wish that thing wasn't in the way, in the room. I wonder if we can take the chimney down and knock this out of the way. Others may say, this is kind of chopped up, it's odd looking. What else can you show us? And you say, well, as you know, the inventory is very limited. So you better make your best offer now because there isn't much else for you to look at. And you might get an answer, well, yeah, I know we lost out on 3 other because we tried to negotiate. But this just isn't really financially feasible for us to have to rebuild the whole interior. I think we'll wait until something better comes along. Others may say, this is fabulous, it's wonderful. You know, here's how much I'm willing to pay. Well, and I'm willing to pay this much more than you're asking because it has nothing to do with market value. It's got to do with how high do I have to go to beat out everybody else, which is kind of crazy, but that's what we've all been dealing with. Here's a good example of a bonus room, a family room, a great room, whatever terminology you want to use. But when I go in there as the appraiser, as any other appraiser will do, we've got to find the 5-foot mark on the slope. We come out to this point where you can see this dormer. This is a cross gable detail. And we're going to be measuring along this wall at the 5-foot point. And we're going to go across here. I know the arrows look a little crazy the way I placed them in, but I had to work with it with what I had. Again, 7 feet at least, over greater than 50% or greater of the area being measured. This whole upper story was 7 feet easily. It was actually 8. Here's a classic case with the Juliet balcony looking out over what you know is an open 2-story foyer. Okay. What's going to get measured, interestingly enough, on the 2nd floor is the actual staircase. As you know, it's taking up space on the 1st floor, but it's actually part of the 1st floor calculation. Great. When I go up to the 2nd floor, I am going to be including the same stairwell. in my second floor calculation, because with ANSI, staircases are calculated on the levels that they service. So if it services the first floor, and in order to get to the second, it needs to service you to get up there, it's part of both levels. So your sketch, or my sketch, is going to back out the second floor, let's say from, it's going to be 14 feet in this case, when I measured this house. From the front door in, it was 14 feet. I came across the landing, which was about 42 inches. It looks like 3 feet, but it was 42. The stairway width, and then what we call the run was. And this was an L shape that went up and made a turn. So the second floor actually included this in the second level calculation, but it did not include the open air space. I know it's going to take time. You know it's going to take time. But once we get familiar enough with it, you're going to like it. And like I said, I've been working with this since 2003. Guess how many times they've made revisions? Took them 10 years to make a revision the first time, which is 2013. It took them 8 years to make a couple of other minor revisions, which took us to 2021, when this newer revision was adopted by the American National Standards Institute. So change is not fast with them, which gives us ample time to get familiar with the standard.
So, hey, Tony, this is
Yes,
Steve.
Dave?
Just going to hop in here. We're about halfway through, and we do have a question coming up. You're going to be covering below grade space in a little bit, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, great, because we have a great question from Rick Coughlin that we'll hold off until you get there.
Okay. Definitely we'll get there. I'll speed it up. Okay, these are a couple of examples. An upper level finished room is 12 by 12 or 144 square feet, but it has a vertical height of 6 feet 9 inches. So that's 72 inches plus 9 gives us 81 inches. The 144 square foot 12 by 12 room is not included in the GLA calculation in the appraisal report. Now remember, it's not included in Fannie Mae's required GLA calculation. That does not mean that 144 square feet of a finished room doesn't appear elsewhere in the appraiser's grid. Yeah, I'm just going to show you how that'll all come into play, especially those of us who have, decades of experience. We know how to handle these things. The question is, does the lender's underwriting know how to handle it? Because they're learning this, many of them, for the first time. So I find in some of the reports that I do for the few lenders I still accept work for, I'm actually kind of teaching in the appraisal report how this information was calculated, how it should be interpreted, just to try to help them learn a little bit better. In the upper level, remember now, this room is 12 by 12. It has an 8-foot ceiling height though, and the slopes down on both sides to the 4-foot mark. So it says here that the area within the 5-foot vertical distance is 1 foot backing out on both sides. So what we actually end up with is 12 feet minus 2 feet is 10. We end up with a 10 by 12 room, 120 square feet. But this is all gross living area because it meets the ceiling minimum height. So it shows in the report as the GLA calculation. This one does not, but it will show elsewhere. In this slide, and I think you will be getting copies of this slide presentation, another method to prove out that 12 by 12 calculation is what we just did here, is backing it out, showing that there's 24 feet unaccounted for. So you take 144, you minus 24 feet, you end up with 120 feet. That's for this one. If ceiling heights are under 7 feet, how can appraisers account for room counts located in above grade areas that do not adhere to the standard? Now, this is where it gets confusing. So please listen up. Although Fannie Mae will not allow the appraiser to include finished square footage above grade that does not meet the ceiling height requirements in that GLA line on the appraisal report, which is the Fannie Mae form, and I'll show it to you. They do want us to include how many totally finished rooms are there, which means regardless of what the ceiling height is, above the grade, not below grade yet. So in this particular example, I might only have 6 rooms, 3 bedrooms, let's say 1.5 baths that meet the GLA. So that's going to get calculated. But I have 2 more rooms upstairs with another half bath above grade with low slope, low ceiling height. I'm going to show it as 8 rooms. 2 more rooms. I don't want to say they're both bedrooms, one of them being a bedroom, but there'll be, 8 rooms, excuse me. We'll have maybe 1 more bedroom, which will make it a 4. And then we have 1 full and 2 half baths. That's how it would get reported. So the total rooms, bedrooms, and bathroom section of the appraisal report, which is the Fannie Mae form that they use, not what we use, but what they require us to use for their purposes, it will include that total rooms. Okay, here's an example from a Fannie Mae form of what I'm talking about. This comes out of what's called the improvement section on page 1 of the Fannie Mae form. You can see they're asking the appraiser to identify, is this detached housing, attached housing, or semi-detached housing, meaning an end unit? What is the basement area? Now, basement is anything below grade or partially below grade. And I'll explain that to the gentleman that's asked a good question about below grade. Basement is below grade. And some areas which are partially below grade are going to be wholly below grade. There is no such thing as partially above grade or partially below grade with Fannie Mae. It is either all below or all above. There's nothing in between. Then they ask us for the basement finish, how much of that basement area is finished. We'll get into that. The attic. In the case of the photos that I just showed you, I'm going to be saying attic, floor, finished, stairs, heated, because that's what I observed. It was finished, there were stairs to get up there, it was heated, and it was all finished. Okay, what they're going to note when they review everything is they're going to note this, and they're going to look at the building sketch that's included in this appraisal report to see how the standard of measure was followed and make sure it's consistent. These things are getting scrutinized and have been for many, many decades, far more than most real estate agents even have a clue about. That's why in a lot of cases, these things come back to the appraiser post-closing. You've already closed the loan, you've already been paid, the appraiser's on the hook for 5 years, and this gets reviewed 4.5 years later, and now there's a challenge. So it's not easy being an appraiser doing mortgage-related work. All right, here we go. Finished area above grade contains how many total rooms, how many bedrooms, how many baths, and what is the square footage of the living area above grade. And in this case here, GLA. So those 8 rooms I just gave you the example of included the attic 2 rooms, but the attic square footage is not included in this calculation. So just understand it. Here's the grid when the appraiser has 3 to 9 properties, like many of us do, 3, 6, 9 properties out, all included for various reasons. And you can see across the grid, here's the total number of above grade room count, but here is the gross living area. And the sketch is showing the gross living area, and you're only counting 6 rooms. Why did the appraiser say 8 and 4? Because there's 2 more that are not GLA, but they are finished. So it's showing down here as finished attic, non-GLA, 436 square feet. And then there's a value assigned to. This comp doesn't have a finished attic, but it's got bigger GLA See that attic? This one here is going to get a plus added to that sale price to make it equal to this property, because we've already subtracted the larger size. So we subtract the larger size to make it equal for the differential. But here we're going to add to this property something the subject has that it does not have for, let's say, comparable number one. So again, if ceiling heights are below 7 feet in the entire house, which they could be, I'll give you two good examples. Those of us who appraise in, don't forget, this was settled during the first and second English settlement period. You've got homes built 15 something, 16 something. They had no need for 7-foot ceiling heights. Chances are most of that nomenclature housing is below 7 feet. We refer to those really as historic construction. At least that's what I refer to it as. It may also be a historic property, meaning it is locally historic for various reasons. Generally, it's architectural detail, or it could be a landmark property on the National Register, somebody famous associated with it. Fannie Mae recognizes here that there may be exceptions, and they are allowing the appraiser to use a very specific code in what's called the property additional features section. It's on page 1. See, it says additional features. Then they give examples such as special energy efficient items, etc. Well, here I can insert a code if I'm appraising a property that has no ceilings above 7 feet, and I'm going to explain in detail why I am invoking the exception. And I'm going to provide evidence to back me up, which means I'm going to introduce sales of properties that also did not have ceiling heights of 7 feet to demonstrate that they exist in the market and that it is not adverse to the marketability of such properties. So that, remember, if Fannie Mae buys the loan, they eat the loan pretty much when it goes bad, or if it goes bad. Most often these days, there's been some changes in their guidelines regarding repurchase. So they want to make very certain that there are no characteristics about a property securing or collateralizing a loan for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that is going to make that property have a problem with marketability for them. So I pretty much answered it. In this case here, I'm going to say the above grade gross living area is 0. There are no ceiling heights. Another example is a berm home, not to be confused with an underground home. There are various other styles, but a berm home basically has a large section of it really is subterranean, but it still sticks above the grade. Then earth is bermed around it at the grade and above to make it energy efficient or whatever it may be. Okay. For, you know, people who live with crystals every day, they're kind of attracted to that type of housing, and they want to feel the vibes of planet Earth. But the bottom line is there may not be any 7-foot ceiling height minimum. So there's another example where it may qualify. This is an example of a berm home. Okay. You can see it's at grade at this point. It actually is also partially below. But here, where they bermed up the earth around it, technically, that's the finished grade. So it is below finished grade.
So Tony,
Yes,
Tony,
Steve.
yeah,
Yep.
we got about 15 minutes left, even though we can stay around a little bit longer if we need to. Most of the questions that are coming in are about, believe it or not, one of our favorite topics, split levels.
Okay.
Where you've got a little bit below grade and a little bit above.
Okay.
Or walk out at the back. The
Yep.
other thing, one other question, which I thought I would hop in here for a second. Somebody asked, well, since this is Fannie Mae only, you know, what are appraisers doing? And my experience so far, Tony, and you may have heard this from the appraisers you've been talking with, is that most appraisers are now using these standards on all of their assignments, not
Correct,
just because you don't always know when they're going to go to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac.
correct.
And so these standards are being used pretty much universally now. So,
Yeah.
okay, I will get out of your way and let you
Okay.
go and talk
I'm
about
trying to stay
basements
on-
and
Trying
other
to stay
good
on
stuff.
point. Right, these are just examples of some of those antique style homes where you may not have 7 feet. Okay. For those that don't know, this is basically called mud sill construction. You can see it's built right on the dirt. We don't have time to get into those details, but anyway, what about finished basements on lower levels? Okay, below grade finished square footage of a house. This is Fannie Mae, right out of their guidelines and their instructions to underwriters. Is the sum of the finished areas that are wholly or partially below grade, and they must be calculated as basement area, not above grade. Here's an example of a finished basement, okay? Here's an example of another finished basement. Some of them have pretty good quality, equal to the above grade. Here's another one. The topography is such that on the back of a house, excuse me, they have a direct walkout to a patio. Now, don't be fooled. It looks like it's at grade. In this case here, you had to walk up a flight of granite steps to get up to the main part of the yard with the pool and everything else. But the fact that some of that floor level, and I'm going to show you some of that floor level, you're partially below the ground. If you could walk right through that wall, you'd see it. And I'm going to show you the split entry, which is actually a raised ranch. Things like split entries, raised ranch, raised basement homes are actually modified ranch homes. So that's why in many cases, if you don't have a raised ranch or a split, a ranch is considered a viable substitute, meaning it is effectively competitive with those modified ranch designs, and they appeal to the same purchaser. That's the difference. So below grade finished rooms are not included now in the total room count reported in that above grade section. Remember I showed you on the form. So the below grade finished rooms stay below grade. They're going to be valued. Here's the grid. Basement and finished rooms below grade. Basement, 1,001 square feet. Rooms below grade, 3 rooms, full bath. Finished 1,000, basement 1,001. How many square feet of that is finished? 650. Is it a walk up or a walk out? It's a walk out, meaning at the back of that basement. But here's how many rooms there are, and here's how many bathrooms. And then the functional utility gets considered. Does this enhance the functional utility? If so, you may say standard plus. Okay, let me keep going because I'm getting short. Accessory dwelling units, according to Fannie Mae, must also follow the ANSI standard. Okay, whether it's above grade or below grade, or partially below grade, or even detached above a detached garage from the main house, it all must meet the ANSI standard. We know that ADUs is a complicated issue in Massachusetts. Unfortunately, there's a lot of politics involved. In the state of New Hampshire, it became statute because a lot of Massachusetts people were moving over the border after selling their house in Mass and making a lot of money. They decided to move in with one of the kids in tax-free, which includes inheritance tax-free New Hampshire, and kick in some money to build an accessory dwelling unit so they could live with the family, but separate from the family in an attached living design. Now, this is another class altogether. Here's an example of a PDU and an ADU. An ADU stands for an accessory dwelling unit. MLS likes the term in-law apartment. The term apartment implies income generating property, which I don't advise unless it's able to be rented. Do not use in-law apartment. We use the term accessory dwelling unit. PDU stands for primary dwelling unit. In almost all states, the accessory dwelling unit is regulated in terms of how big it can be. In many cases, it's 700 square feet, no larger, 900 square feet, no larger, must be fully subordinate and dependent on the primary dwelling unit, can have separate kitchen, can even have a separate electric meter, probably shares the same septic system, same well, if they're on well and septic, other kinds of things. There's a lot of details that go into ADUs that you need to investigate with the municipality, because if you don't do it, I'm going to do it when I'm going to appraise, let's say, this property. And it may be something that doesn't help your deal if you haven't been a little more diligent. So please be careful. This is an example of a direct walk-up of a basement. Looks great, doesn't it? But it's basement, according to Fannie Mae. Here's the infamous split entry, raised ranch, whatever you want to call it. Very common, two-car overhead door, a passage door that goes directly into the lower level that may or may not be finished, might be partially finished, but because the grade line up here runs here, this constitutes below grade area, even though it's raised up. So this is the GLA. Looks like a ranch, doesn't it? Because that's what it is, but it's been modified by raising the basement elevation, okay, to contour to topography. So this is gross living area, and in terms of ANSI, this is above grade finished square footage. That's what ANSI calls it. This is below grade finished square footage if it's finished, or unfinished square footage over a portion of it, because we had to sketch it out. And we put the calculations in to show here's the basement size, here's the square footage of what's unfinished, here's the square footage of what is finished as measured. The quality of the finished below grade is such that it resembles the quality of construction of the upper level. The condition is equivalent to the upper level. It's up to the appraiser to call the shot there. In the case of me, I'm probably going to apply, because I can go to the market, that the market views this as additional living space, recognizing that it's below grade, but mom and dad can have a very clean house up here, and the teenage kids can be slobs down here. They love it. They like this design. In some areas, that's the in-law accessory unit, so they can get used to already being half buried, maybe. I don't know. There are various reasons for it. Okay, other areas, garages, unfinished areas, accessory buildings, outbuildings, finished areas above grade that do not meet the minimum ceiling height, and finished protrusions without a floor that extend beyond the exterior finished surface of the outside walls are not included in the calculation of finished square footage. This is a room above a garage. Yes, it's finished. And in all probability, it is value contributing. A typical purchaser with this feature of a property would see that as additional space that can be used. Could be an office, could be a craft room, could be a college kid home on semester break, having fun. You know, it's got a lot of purposes for them. This is a good example of an outbuilding. It's not a typical cabana. This thing was fully finished with a full functioning kitchen, full functioning bath, common gathering space. It is poolside, but its contribution to value, just looking at the quality of the build, is not going to be equal to a Reed's Ferry shed that gets dropped on concrete blocks and woodchucks live underneath it. This is quite a bit different. This is an example of a protruding bay window. For calculation purposes, that wall is straight. Here's an example of a bow window. For calculation purposes, that wall is straight. Here's an example of twin angle bays, but see how on the lower level it goes all the way down? This is the interior. Fully finished in the angle bay. This is the breakfast room. It does have a 7-foot ceiling height. In that case, this is part of gross living area above grade, as is this, which is the sitting area in what was called the main bedroom these days, because it too was finished. So what can realtors do when they're listing a house to help an appraiser? The bottom line is please include information that the appraiser needs to accurately compare one house to another. And let me tell you where this backfires on realtors. You're reporting it's 2,678 square feet. Some appraisers are going to say, okay, let me use 2,500 square feet to 3,500 square feet and see what is sold. Now you reported 2,800 and some odd square feet. In reality, it was 1,985 square feet. Guess what happened? All the research the appraiser did based on your inaccurate information, if you were that listing agent, is tossed out. You misrepresented the property. So please be careful. Let's say you didn't misrepresent and you were right on point. And you said, here is the above grade calculation total. And I use a company that comes in and they measure. Well, guess what? They don't all know what they're doing, because I look at those measurements like you do, and I say, what are they talking about? Living area. We calculate on the exterior wall. Why are they adding in the mudroom? Mudroom's not a heated space. It's in the lower level. It's basement. So their calculation is wrong to you, and you're relying on it. Anyway, note that when there are rooms with ceilings less than 7 feet, put that in the listing sheet. You don't have to use exactly this language. You could say upper story, some upper story rooms have a low slope. That gives us a little bit of a hint as far as looking at the assessor card, because assessors use half story and 3/4 story as upper story measures. I use square footage calculation, which does not follow half story, 3/4 story in most cases. Their 3/4 story calculation is actually 0.9 story in my calculation, which means my second level is bigger than what they're showing because they're using a different standard. This is why standardizing the standard is just a great way for us to go once we all get used to it. Okay, so exchange meaningful property information. I asked an appraiser, a real estate agent the other day, a listing agent, aside from the typical question, where in the world did you ever get your list price? I asked him, are you familiar with ANSI at all? Because I'm just trying to get some survey going. And he goes, what's ANSI? And I said, okay. So it's something you may want to get used to, because this upper story in this house, which has 3 big rooms, they do not have 7-foot ceiling heights. So you've overstated the living area of that house. Now, finished area, if that's what you want to use in your communication with potential buyers, you could say, there's 2,800 total finished square footage, but some of that is below grade and it's going to be valued perhaps less than if it was fully above grade. You make the buyer aware of that. You're trying to educate them as a consumer, perhaps. At the same time, I'm sharing meaningful information with you, because I'm saying to you, as a potential listing agent, you call me and say, I'm going against 4 other brokers. They're all over the place with their pricing. I know I've done my research. How much would you charge me for an independent appraisal? So I can go back to the sellers and say, here's what I suggest you listed it at, which is obviously for competitive pricing, not for market value. And here's an actual market value report. And you can see we're pretty darn close. You may have better credibility than the other 4 that are in there, promoting a brand with a big, thick CMA. You're actually talking hard statistics in some cases, and you're talking factual data that has evidence in the market to support it. It's almost 3 o'clock. I apologize. I could talk to you. Trust me, I teach this in a 7-hour class. But for more information pertaining to those Fannie Mae guidelines, it's going to be in section B, Fannie Mae's guidelines are way over 1,000 pages, but it's going to be singlefamily.fanniemae.com, and you can toggle your way through if you're so inclined. If you have team members, which some of you do, I enjoy working with some team members. They're not there just to open the door for a home inspector. They actually have some knowledge about the product, because I can assure you, when I get to a property, I know as much, if not more than you do about that property. And we're going to exchange some information and have a meaningful conversation as I'm walking through, taking measurements, taking photographs. You know, I might say to you, how many other buyers lost out on this property because they couldn't bid up higher? You'd say 4 of them. I'm still working with a couple of them directly. What else did you show them? Did you show them this design? Did you show them that design? Because what I'm doing is I'm verifying sentiment of the market. And when you say to me, although ideally they wanted one level living, the location meant much more to them, so they were willing to compromise and look at a cape. And in fact, they are putting an offer in tonight on a cape, okay? Which blows a hole in the underwriter for me. And I can say, sorry, underwriter, comps don't always resemble each other. They have property attributes that make them effectively competitive, one with the other, that a typical purchaser would consider as viable substitutes, okay? I come from the world now, and have for 32 years, of property economics. I don't come from how much can I list it for to attract the greatest attention of buyers. The economic term for that is the widest distribution.
So Tony, I'm going to hop in here because we are a couple of minutes.
I'm on the last
3.
slide. You can see there's nothing else to show.
I know that, and we do have a bunch of questions that I'd really like to try to see if we could get to.
I will gladly stay here.
Okay, and some of these I'll help you with too. Okay, the first of all, you know, have we had any discussions with MLS PIN about this? And the answer is yes. But as we all know, it sometimes takes a while for us to be able to work any kind of changes through. Another one is, Tony, what language would you suggest that an agent might use to disclose a 2-story foyer in the listing?
What you just said.
2-story
foyer, open foyer. Some of them are cathedral, as you know.
Right.
Try to use a recognized architectural term in a lot of your disclosures about a property. That gives you a lot more credibility. You don't have to be an architect. Also, if you go into some of your realtor resources, you have a little booklet that you can scroll through and look at drawings of what's a cape, what's a gambrel, what's a center entrance colonial, and on the story goes. That's in your own realtor library resources. Does that help?
Yeah. Okay. So Tony, as far as we know, I haven't heard anything that says this. Assessors have a real problem trying to remeasure and calculate houses using this simply because they have no right of entry to the house. And so I'm not hearing anything about assessors going back out and remeasuring properties for.
Well, let me fill you in quick on that. Okay. The property record card or the field card will say what the source of the information was. It'll say at the door, or it'll say no, access not allowed. It doesn't take me very long to pick up the phone and call the assessing offices and say, can you pull such and such a record card, map and parcel number? When was the last time somebody went in? Yada, yada. What standard did you use to calculate it? Well, we really don't know. And I say, okay, I realize that. You don't know that, but I know it because I've been in there. I'm just sharing this with you. It's a 2-story foyer. So your second level calculation needs to back out 140 square feet, you know, to be a little more reliable. Or I will look at the MLS interior photo gallery, and you know yourself, I can go back quite a few years now, and I'll look at a previous listing of the same property that was canceled, an attempt to rent the property that was canceled, a foreclosure of the property that came on as an REO and was sold, and then maybe the most recent one, which shows that the property was purchased, it went through substantial rehab and renovation, and it came back on the market and obviously sold for a lot of money because of the substantial renovation rehab. At which point I contact the building department, either, generally I find email, I get better response. And I'll say, do you have the permit plans for the degree of rehab and renovation? And they'll say, yeah, but we're not going to send them to you. You got to come in and look at it. Okay. I'm just saying the information can be available from other sources.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to note that there are several different systems out there that assessors use. And some of those systems, like a town that may use the Patriot Properties system, their GLA or GBA or whatever we want to call it, GLA may include actually attics or basements. And that can be more difficult to understand, particularly when you're dealing with a buyer who then looks at the appraisal, and the appraisal comes in with different measurements than what the assessor is showing. I'm going to move on to just a couple more questions, Tony.
Yep, please.
You showed the grid earlier. On a lower level, if it has a bathroom, that goes on that
on the lower level.
On the lower level,
The
and
square footage is, but not the bathroom.
You're just
bathroom
there,
count.
There you go.
Sorry. Yeah.
So that would go right below where the yellow highlighting is.
Correct.
Okay.
And what they ask for, now this is Fannie Mae's, what they call data capture. It's uniform appraisal data set that Fannie Mae uses. They're capturing data bits from these types of reports. And what they're doing is they're capturing total rooms 8, total bedrooms 4, total baths 1.1 means 1 full dot 1 half. Below grade, square footage. How much of that is finished? XYZ square footage. And a walk out or a walk up. Rooms below grade. I might say 3 finished rooms, 1 full bath. They'll know there's a full bath below the grade, finished grade.
Okay.
That bathroom does get counted, but it gets counted below grade, Steve.
Okay, hang there just for a second on that slide.
Yeah.
And I think we covered all of this, but again, you talked about the raised ranch or the split level. And I think it's important to note, I don't believe that's just a Fannie Mae requirement. I believe Freddie Mac handles
And HUD
above
and
grade and
FHA.
below grade the same way, correct?
HUD, FHA, and VA also.
Okay, so it's a universal requirement that if any part of the basement is below grade, then the whole basement is below grade. Is that a fair statement? Any part of
Well,
the basement,
basements are below grade, that's why they're basements. But,
if any, okay, so
but
if any,
anything partly below grade will be counted as basement level,
okay,
even if it's partially above. Because some of it is below, it's all below, according to Fannie, Freddie, HUD, FHA, VA, USDA, and on the story goes.
and that includes even if it has a great full walkout at grade level, let's say at the back.
Yes, it does.
Okay, I think we've covered the below grade fairly well. There's a question in here about handling this on CMAs, and I'm not so sure that that's within our wheelhouse, because that's a more of a realtor product than it is an appraisal product. And then let's just see. I think we've pretty much gone through all the questions. Does any? We'll stay here for 30 more seconds if anybody wants to type quick to see if there's a last question or something that we didn't necessarily clarify well enough for you.
Yeah, just some general commentary from me. I'm proactive. I understand the challenges, believe me, of the housing market. Keep an open mind. Don't close yourself off from being willing to learn something a little bit different than what we have habitually been used to, because it just could lead to a little bit better opportunity. And when everything is said and done, you're growing professionally when you keep that open mind. And when you interact with other professionals in the housing market, which includes me, people like me, appraisers.
Okay, I think, Tony, with that, we're gonna wrap up here. I want to thank the many people who joined us on this webinar.
Me
I want to
too.
thank the Mass Association of Realtors for hosting this and inviting us to come in and do this. And particularly, Tony, I'd like to thank you for putting it together and making the presentation today. And to my good friend Rick Coughlin, have a great afternoon. We'll see you all you folks later sometime, I hope. Take care now.
Thank you very much.
Bye now.